Hello, my dear students. I hope you all are safe at your home. Stay home and stay safe. Today, I am here with you to teach you one lesson from your supplementary reader, The Address written by Maga Mingo. The address written by Maga Mingo. She is a Dutch journalist and writer. She is a Dutch journalist and writer. This story is about human predicament that follows the war. The story is about human predicament that follows the war. The theme of this story is the crisis that we as an individual encounter in our day-to-day life. Let's see the introduction once more. The story written by Maga Mingo. She is a Dutch journalist and writer. The story is about human predicament that follows the war. The theme of the story is the crisis that we encounter in our day-to-day life. Before moving into the lesson, let's see the important characters. First one is narrator. Who is the narrator? Maga Mingo. Who is the narrator? Maga Mingo. Mrs. S, mother of the narrator. Mrs. S, narrator's mother. Mrs. Darling, an acquaintance of mother. Mrs. Darling, an acquaintance of mother. The next one, a girl of 15, daughter of Mrs. Darling. Daughter of Mrs. Darling. Listen, Shravya, can you say who are the important characters in this lesson? Narrator, Maga Mingo. Mrs. S, mother of the narrator. Mrs. Darling, an acquaintance of mother, that means a friend of narrator's mother. A girl of 15, daughter of Mrs. Darling. Listen once more. Narrator, who is the narrator? Maga Mingo. Second one, Mrs. S, mother of the narrator. Narrator's mother, that means Maga Mingo's mother. Mrs. Darling, Maga Mingo's mother's intimate friend. Last one, a girl of 15, Mrs. Darling's daughter. These are the important characters in this lesson. Then now all of you listen here. The narrator's mother was a wealthy woman. The narrator's mother was a, who is the narrator? Maga Mingo. Narrator's mother was her mother was a wealthy woman who had a collection of rich and beautiful things. She had a collection of rich and beautiful things. She had fine silver, cutlery and antiques. Then she had fine silver cutlery. Cutlery, what do you mean by the word cutlery? Knives, forks and spoons used for eating. She had fine silver cutlery and antiques. Antiques here means furniture and artworks. That means she is a wealthy lady. She had a collection of rich and beautiful things. She had fine silver cutlery and antiques. Antiques means furniture and artworks. Cutlery means knives, forks and spoons used for eating and serving food. Okay, understand? The narrator mother was a wealthy woman. She had a collection of rich and beautiful things. She had fine silver cutlery and antiques. Now the war had started in Holland. Now the war had started in Holland. Their life was threatened. So their life was threatened. It was very likely that she and her daughter would be taken away from their home. Then it is sure that she and her daughter, that means narrator's mother and narrator, would be taken away from their home. Her valuable belongings would be destroyed. Then that means war was going on. Narrator's mother and narrator would be taken away from, that means they have to move from their home. So her valuable belongings would be destroyed. Why? Because war was going on. Mrs. Darling was an old acquaintance of the narrator's mother. Mrs. Darling, who was Mrs. Darling? Narrator's mother's friend. Was an old acquaintance of narrator's mother. That means narrator's mother's friend, Mrs. Darling. She suggested that she should take all those things to her house for safekeeping. She said that she was ready to keep their valuable things safely in her home. She came frequently and took away all those things in bags and suitcases. So what did she do? Mrs. Darling came to their house frequently and took away all those valuable things in bags and suitcases. That means she agreed that she was ready to keep the valuable things in her home. During the first half of the war, the narrator came to see her mother. During the first half of the war, the narrator, Magamingo, came to see her mother. She immediately noticed that some of the things were missing. Then Magamingo immediately noticed that some of the valuable things are missing from her house. Then mother explained to her the arrangement she had made with Mrs. Darling. Then the narrator's mother told her the arrangement she had made with Mrs. Darling. Then Mrs. Darling said that she was ready to keep their valuable belongings safely in her home. The narrator wanted her mother to make Mrs. Darling promise that she would keep things for them. So the narrator Magamingo asked her mother to make Mrs. Darling promise that she would keep things for them. Then Magamingo asked her mother to make sure that Mrs. Darling keep all the valuable things in her home. But mother did not think it necessary. But mother did not think this matter as a serious one. Mrs. Darling had come to take some of the things in a suitcase. Mrs. Darling used to come to their house to take valuable things from their home to her house. Then because she was already agreed that she was ready to keep their valuable things safely in her home. Then one day she had come to narrator's house. During that time, narrator was also there. Mother introduced the narrator to Mrs. Darling. Mother introduced the narrator to Mrs. Darling. She also told the narrator that Mrs. Darling lived at number 46 in Marconi Street. Then she also told the narrator that Mrs. Darling lived at number 46 in Marconi Street. She told her to remember the address. Her mother also told her to remember the address because she agreed that she was ready to keep all their valuable things in their home. So one day when Magamingo came to their house, Mrs. Darling was also there. So her mother introduced her. Then she told her that Mrs. Darling lived at number 46 in Marconi Street. She told her to remember the address. The war for liberation came to an end. The narrator returned home. She had lost all interest in the things handed over to Mrs. Darling. Then her mother already handed over all valuable things to Mrs. Darling, but the narrator Magamingo did not like this. After all those things used to be kept in boxes and cupboards, they were rarely taken out for use. They kept these things very safely, but her mother handed over all these valuable things to Mrs. Darling. But the narrator did not like this. Gradually, everything became more normal again. And one day, the narrator was reminded of all her possessions. Then one day, the narrator was reminded of all her possessions. The mother was no more alive. Then during the war, her mother died. She was alone. Now the narrator was alone, living in a single room. Then now she was living in a single room. There was no space to recover all those things and keep them in that room. Then there was no space to recover all those things and keep them in that room. Then now she was living in a single room. Then during that time she was reminded about the valuable things. But she has in her house there is no space to keep all these things. Still she wanted to see them and touch them once. Even then she wanted to get them back. So she travelled by train to Marconi Street and rang the doorbell of house number 46. So what did he do? He went to Mrs. Darling's house in house number 46. A woman opened the door partly. A lady opened the door. Through the narrow opening, she studied the visitor. Through the narrow opening, Mrs. Darling understood the narrator. So what did he do? She was Mrs. Darling herself. She had not expected the girl to come back home alive. Then Mrs. Darling never expected that she would come back. She refused to recognize the visitor. Mrs. Darling said that she did not understand her. The narrator for a while wondered if she had come to a wrong place. At first, narrator Magamingo thought that she had come to a wrong place. But the doubt was removed when he saw Mrs. Dowling wearing her mother's green knitted sweater. Then at first he thought that he had come to a wrong place, but suddenly he understood. Then that means she saw Mrs. Dowling was wearing her mother's sweater. So he understood that the place he had come was the right place. So she had come to the right address. Mrs. Dowling could not help asking how she alone had survived the war. Mrs. Dowling did not ask anything to the narrator. She refused to let the visitor into the house. Mrs. Dowling did not allow her to get into the house. She closed the door also. She closed the door. She did not allow her to get into the house. The narrator looked at the same nameplate again. Again, the narrator was confused whether she was in the right place. Again, she looked at the nameplate again. It said Dowling, number 46. The address was correct. She walked back to the station and traveled back to the memory lane. Again, she went back to his house. Her first visit to Mrs. Dowling's house was in vain. Her first visit was vain. Then actually he decided to get back the valuable things from Mrs. Dowling, but her first visit was in vain. But she did not accept defeat. She decided to try a second time. So what did she decide? She decided to go to that particular house again. This time, Mrs. Dowling's 15-year-old daughter opened the door. The next, when narrator went there, who opened the door? Mrs. Dowling's 15-year-old daughter opened the door. Mrs. Dowling was not at home. Mrs. Dowling was not at home during that time. The narrator decided to wait. The narrator decided to wait and meet Mrs. Dowling. She followed the girl along the passage. She saw her heavy candle holders hung next to the mirror. Then she noticed that her heavy candle holders hung next to a mirror. She was taken to the living room. Then she went to the living room. She found herself in the midst of things which she wanted to see. Actually, she came there to wanted to see the things and get back the things. She saw all the things, but she was pained to see them arranged in a tasteless way, but they did not arrange them properly. The furniture was ugly and the air was damp smelling. She sat down at a table and noticed that the tablecloth was hers. Then she sat down at a table and noticed that the tablecloth was hers. It had a burn mark to the edge, left unrepaired by her mother. Then she sat at the table and noticed that the tablecloth was hers. It had a burn mark to the edge, left unrepaired by her mother. That means she remembered, she saw all the things in their room. The girl said that her mother would be back soon and she had already made tea for her. The girl said that her mother would come back soon. They waited there. The girl offered a cup to the visitor as well. The 15-year-old girl, offered a cup of tea to the narrator. She opened the box and took some spoons out. The girl opened the box and took some spoons out. All those things were a part of her mother's belongings. All those were the narrator's mother's belongings. Mrs. Dowling's daughter also never noticed that the cutlery she used every day was silver, but the daughter did not know all these things. She opened a drawer to bring out more spoons and forks. Then she also opened a box to bring out more spoons and forks. But the narrator did not wait to see them. But narrator, by seeing all these things, the narrator was not ready to wait there. She did not want to meet Mrs. Dowling. Then after seeing all these things, she did not want to meet Mrs. Dowling. So she jumped up to go to catch her train. So she jumped up, that means she went back from there. At the corner of the road, she looked up the nameplate. At the corner of the road, she looked at the nameplate. The address was correct, but she did not want to remember it anymore. But she did not remember the address again. Her mother already told her to remember that address, but this point of view, she did not like to remember that particular address. She had no intention to visit that house again. She did not like to visit the house again to get back her valuable things. She had lost interest in the things that had been taken away from her house and put in a strange surroundings. They arranged the things in a bad manner, so she did not like it. Moreover, she had no need of them in her small rented room. Then we have already seen. Now she lived in a rented room. She had only one room. Only a handful of cutlery fitted to the narrow table drawer. So she made up her mind to forget that address forever. So what did she do? She decided to forget that address. And it was quite easy to do now. Then she decided to forget to remember that address. It was quite easy for her to do that particular point of view. Here ends this lesson. Then all of you listen. Let's summarize this lesson. This story written by Maga Mingo. Who are the important characters in this lesson? The narrator, Maga Mingo, Mrs. S, narrator's mother, Mrs. Dowling, an acquaintance of mother, a girl of 15, daughter of Mrs. Dowling. Mrs. Dowling joined in the war for liberation in Holland. Then in her absence, her mother used to meet Mrs. Dowling. And Mrs. Dowling told her that she was ready to keep all their valuable belongings safely in her home. Maga Mingo's mother agreed. But later, the narrator's mother died. The narrator went to her house, but Mrs. Dowling was not ready to give back her valuable belongings. Then here ends the story. Then what you learn from after reading the story, what we learn? Money is a poor substitute for happiness and contentment. Money is a poor substitute for happiness and contentment. Do one thing, all of you read the story. I will send you the notes through Google Classroom. Thank you all.